What this bill does is not break Prime for consumers. What this bill does is open up the doors of competition so that Amazon can still set their very high standard for Amazon Prime fulfillment and open up the door for others to try to meet it. Welcome to the Day 2 podcast. I am Jason Boyce. I was an Amazon top 200 seller for about 17 years before writing a book with my friend Rick Cesare called The Amazon Jungle and hosting the Day 2 podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. Folks, today we're going to do something a little bit different. I've been constantly thinking about a recent interview at the Code Conference of Andy Jassy by Kara Swisher. We're going to focus on a section of the interview that started at about the 20-minute mark. We'll leave a YouTube link to the interview in the show notes. And why have I been thinking about it so much? Because it was really frustrating to hear some of the things that Andy Jassy said. After 20 plus years in the Amazon selling game, I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about the antitrust bill that's pending in the Senate and waiting for a bipartisan vote, because Andy Jassy had a very different view than I. Please understand, my viewpoint about Amazon comes and is informed by more than 20 years, either as a small business seller or as a representative representing small business brands who are selling on Amazon platform. So keep that in mind. We're going to start by saying, I'll say what Andy Jassy said. There's some moments where I'll share what Kara Swisher asked and some of her very pointed comments. And then I'll give you my take. Take it or leave it. It's my opinion. I feel strongly about it. And I've been following this bill for a long time, all the way back when it was HR 3816. So let's talk about it. So number one, Kara Swisher says, hey, she calls it the Amy Klobuchar bill. I think it's more appropriate to call it the Klobuchar-Senator Grassley bill, because this bill has a lot of bipartisan support. Many would say it has the votes to pass now if it was put in front of the Senate. But Senator Schumer has decided not to do so ahead of the midterm elections. What is this bill? It's called, the moniker is S.2992. It is the American Innovation and Choice Online Act. And again, Kara Swisher brought up the issue, and Andy Jassy laid out a number of problems from his perspective. He also mingled in a little bit of complaints, a little bit of why us, a little bit of victimness in throughout it. So without further ado, let's get this started.
I think that the antitrust bill, the Klobuchar-Grassley bill, it's just so broad and overreaching and vague. And I think part of the problem is that when you're explicitly targeting 5 companies and they're all a little bit different from each other.
Let's talk about that. First of all, it's not 5 companies. And he did say to Kara Swisher, I don't know if you've read the bill. I have. Well, guess what? I've also read the bill. And I've spoken with friends of mine who have been instrumental in writing past legislation. And of course, I layer that in with my own opinions. There's not 5 companies. There's actually 7. And here's what they are: Apple, Amazon, Meta, Google or Alphabet, whatever you want to call them, TikTok, Tencent, and Microsoft. These 7 companies have amassed more wealth, data, control, and power than any other brand in the history of the United States. So yeah, they should be targeted. The bill also sets guidelines for future companies that will become online gatekeepers, potentially Walmart, who also does not appear to be supporting this bill. Look, folks, Rockefeller with Standard Oil, railroad barons, Sanford, Fisk, Vanderbilt, Astor with Fur. All of those folks look tiny in comparison to the market share and power and control that today's big tech companies have. More recently, AT&T was busted up, and Microsoft in the 1990s had an antitrust lawsuit brought against them that they ended up losing. But because of the concessions that they were forced to give as part of that decades-long legal fight and as part of their settlement, it made it possible for, wait for it, Google to be born. There are arguments that can be made that said if not for that fight from the government against Microsoft back in the early 90s or throughout the 90s, that Google wouldn't exist today. Is it broad, overreaching, and vague? It's trying to catch up for lost ground is what it's doing, and it's trying to rein in companies that in many ways have become more powerful than the United States government. It doesn't just target 5, it's really 7. And in my opinion, they need to be targeted, each and every one of them. So that's problem number one. Too big, it's too big. Okay, fine. Problem number two.
We've used third-party logistics providers to fulfill Prime before, and they just can't consistently deliver it in the same time frame that we do. And we have 200 million plus Prime members who like Prime in significant part because they get their shipments in a couple of days. And so I think that that is, has a real chance to significantly degrade the quality of Prime and potentially eradicate it if we can't deliver the shipments in a couple few days.
I can tell you that when I was a $25 million Amazon seller, we fulfilled Amazon seller fulfilled Prime and did it quite well. It wasn't easy. It was painstakingly hard, but we offered seller fulfilled Prime out of 3 of our warehouses, and we hit that very strict 98% on-time delivery rate. We even used FedEx, a company that's no longer allowed to do seller fulfilled Prime as part of the program. That seller fulfilled Prime program, by the way, has been shut down. You cannot go in and become an SFP seller right now. They paused it during COVID and they haven't reopened it. So if you want that Prime badge on Amazon, which comes with 30 to 40 to 50% more sales revenue, you have to send your stuff to Amazon and be beholden to them in terms of Amazon FBA fees. FBA fees that, by the way, have been increasing to the tune of 30% increase over the course of the last 2.5 years. That seller can't say, I want the badge, but I'm going to go to somebody else who can do it. Now, there's a couple of legacy seller fulfilled Prime accounts that are still out there, but it's a very small percentage. I would venture a guess that it's probably less than a handful at this point who still have SFP and are able to deliver on that promise. What this bill does is not break Prime for consumers. What this bill does is open up the doors of competition so that Amazon can still set their very high standard for Amazon Prime fulfillment and open up the door for others to try to meet it. I have no doubt that if there's a law that forces Amazon to open up that possibility to meet the very high standards of Prime, that there will be venture capital money and investment put into companies who are willing to accept that challenge and can do it and create a situation of competition that would drive down seller fees for sellers. That's ultimately, I believe, what Mr. Jassy is most concerned about. Is he doesn't have pricing power if 3, 4, 5, a dozen companies can come in and help offer warehousing and fulfillment to your door in 1 or 2 days. So far we're 2 problems in, right? And his interpretation, I'm sure informed by not only his reading the bill, but also his very deep legal team to protect Amazon's interests, I think are not accurate. It's not how I've read the bill. That's not what I see anywhere in the bill. What I see is opening up the door of competition so that sellers can have a choice for who they take their Prime badge business to. It forces Amazon also to compete with those clients, offer better services at a more competitive price. Next, Andy Jassy moves into sort of what I call the you're welcome mode.
Small, medium-sized sellers who sell on Amazon, and they don't sell on Amazon because they get e-commerce software. That's easy and inexpensive to get. They do it because they get access to a few hundred million customers.
To me, that's like Andy Jassy saying, trust us, right? Trust us, you're welcome, sellers. And that leads us to problem number 3.
If you look at the self-preferencing language as written today, it's very broad and very vague. So like, we can't order our search results by Prime eligible, which is how our 200 million plus Prime members want it, or use best sellers or personalized lists if we have a private label product that comes above maybe a similar third-party product.
I've read the bill multiple times, probably 6 to 7 times at this point in its current iteration, and I don't see anywhere in there that says that a search results page can't be filtered or sorted to list only Prime eligible products. I think where the bill has a problem is if Prime eligible products are only offered by Amazon only, that's where they have a problem. So no, I don't see anything in the language, in spite of what Andy Jassy says, that says that you can't sort by Prime. And the second part is no kidding. Of course you can't put a private label inferior product above the results of all other sellers in order to be fair in an online marketplace. So he's probably correct in saying that they wouldn't be able to give preferential treatment. That's what self-preferencing language and this most favored nations clause language is about. So we wanted to prevent that, because Having other sellers have to compete with Amazon and Amazon having to compete with other sellers on a level playing field is what makes the platform better. What makes it better for Amazon shoppers. Problem number 4.
You layer on top of it that the penalties, if you make a mistake, are so extraordinary. They're tens of billions of dollars with the way they've set them up. Would wipe out all the profits that we have each year. And then you layer on top of that an adjudication process where the FTC, which has a leader, Elena Khan, who's not the most objective as it comes to Amazon, she made her career on saying break up Amazon. They can file a complaint and we get to try to prove why we're innocent as opposed to the other way around.
So he has a real problem with that. So let's unpack that a little more. The assumption here in his statement is that Amazon's going to continue to violate these new provisions in the bill once it's passed, and so that he's going to have to pay penalties that will make them unprofitable. Well, don't do the crime and you don't have to pay the time, is what I would say to Andy Jassy on the first point. Secondly, that's just not how it works, right? That's just not how it's written. That's not how it works. The burden of proof for these claims that Amazon violated the laws is entirely with the FTC. If the FTC cannot prove this, the agency loses. This one made me seethe as I listened to it. Does he really not recognize that Amazon has done this to hundreds of thousands of small businesses on its platform over the last 20 years? So it was very rich for me to hear Amazon, Andy Jassy really complain and in some ways whine that they would be proven guilty and have to claim innocence after being proven guilty, when that's exactly what he has done to Amazon sellers for decades. It also reminds me of another thing that Andy Jassy said recently in another interview earlier this year, which was, again, sort of whining to a reporter saying, we can't keep absorbing these costs. The reporter asked, you've instituted another 5% surcharge and now a holiday surcharge. How do you think that affects sellers? And he says, well, we can't just keep absorbing costs. It's along the same lines, right? But he absolutely expects sellers to absorb those costs. So it's definitely not a two-way street. It's definitely unfair. And again, this is what this bill is about. It's providing fairness and opening up the doors to competition, period. And he doesn't like it because the scales are very heavily tilted in their favor on this marketplace the way they're operating right now. Lastly, there's just no proof that, in order for the FTC to bring up a claim, they have to provide a lot of evidence showing what Amazon is doing, right? If Amazon doesn't like that, they can take them to court. That's what the courts are for. But there's nothing that says that you have to pay the fine and then prove your innocence afterward. It's just patently false. Problem number 5. Kara Swisher asked the question.
One of the things you've been investigated for is being a marketplace and a seller. Should you have an ability to have a marketplace and sell? Should there be some rule?
What you're really talking about is private label. And we didn't invent private label. Private label is a 120-year-old practice. Look at Walmart, look at Target, look at Kroger's, look at CVS. I mean, lots of companies do private label.
To Jassy's point, this excludes Target. It currently excludes Walmart, which is bigger than Amazon, he says, in the US. It's bigger than Amazon if you look at what Amazon reports as annual revenue. It's no longer bigger than Amazon if you look at the gross merchandise value or the total retail value of goods sold on Amazon anymore. What it does do is it lays out the ground rules for Target and Walmart as they grow. Personally, I'd be okay lowering this threshold, but it's just a non-starter. It's not going to happen. And ultimately, $550 billion will get smaller each subsequent year as the economy grows. So what about this idea, breaking up retail and third-party marketplace? Andy Jassy's like, no, it's not fair. We didn't invent private label. If you want to write a bill preventing companies from doing private label, go right ahead and do it. But here's the thing. Walmart offers private label products in its stores and even online. If you look at the number of SKUs that Amazon offers is let's say that's one of its largest format stores. It's 150,000, 250,000 products. If you look at the billions of listings on Amazon, of which they can cherry pick from sellers one by one, it's pretty incredible. I mean, Amazon has more data, more purchase intent, more information on products on its platform than any company ever in the history of the world. You can't get those same results by walking down the aisle of a Walmart or a Target store. It's a much higher barrier of entry for someone to come in, walk the aisles, get that back of the envelope information, or that backdoor information, if you will, about a brand to come in and cherry pick and beat it. Not to mention the fact that it's just bad form. Taking information. Peter Daring is another great example recently from Peak Designs, where Amazon ripped off one of its products, an inferior product, and they had all the information. And the buyer and the representatives at Amazon that were working with Peter Daring said they knew. They kind of quietly tipped us off that this was coming. That practice has to stop. It has to stop. Amazon, if you can't compete on a level playing field with the third-party sellers that drive more profit dollars to your bottom line than any other line of business, then get out of that business. Stop doing it. Get on their side. Get on their side of the table and support them rather than compete with them. And I think this bill goes a long way to level that playing field. The next part of this interview, Andy just sort of goes into a little bit of what I call whining. Whining number one, they're out to get us, he says. There's such a crazy us versus them mentality. There's no big issue has ever been solved by scapegoating big companies or demonizing a group of people. Look, I don't think that they're being demonized. I think they're being called out for behavior. And Kara Swisher had a smart counter.
The tech industry's put $95 million in and I've seen so many ads that Amy Klobuchar's breaking the internet. I don't believe she's breaking the internet. You all play tough too, if they're playing tough on the same way.
And actually, to follow up on Kara Swisher's comments, the breakup in the 1920s, the AT&T breakup worked great for US citizens. The case against Microsoft in the 90s arguably allowed Google to be born. Could a new Google be born today? Not possible. Not possible. Give me a break. Breaking up the robber barons and monopolies has always benefited the many rather than the ridiculously wealthy few. And that's what's going on right now. The economy and the game has been stacked in favor of a small handful of incredibly wealthy tech companies and individuals. And that's what government's job is, to level the playing field. Furthermore, Amazon's so powerful that breaking AWS off and away from the Amazon ecosystem and having it stand up at its own company would actually increase shareholder and value. AWS would become $1 trillion company overnight, that its value would double, triple, or even quadruple in some instances. So there's shareholder wealth being tied up without this potential breakup. There's competition that's being suppressed, preventing that next person that wants to start an Amazon out of their garage, right? That next person that wants to start Google out of their dorm room, right? Those folks cannot come to the table and compete legitimately because of the power that all these companies have amassed. Jesse goes on to say,
if you want to change the way data privacy is conducted, write a bill about that. We have 1% worldwide market segment share in retail. Yeah, but 85% of retail care is physical. That's who we compete with. Well, I mean,
you do dominate
85%. That's who we compete with for share. If you want to change private label, let's have that conversation, but let's have it together. We have a better chance of solving the problem together.
There has been no legislation for internet companies ever. I mean, there's been no regulation. Every other industry has this happen to them. I don't know if it's demonizing or it's just it's your time to be regulated.
It's not just, hey, it's time to find some sensible regulations for some of these larger technology companies. It's not how it's being posited.
I just think it's so interesting, this line of reasoning coming from the CEO of Amazon, who's saying, we're small, we're only 1% of worldwide market share. I have been disputing that fact for a very long time. If you look at just the economy in the United States, the number one retail segment is automobiles. Amazon doesn't sell automobiles. I think the number two segment is gas. Amazon doesn't sell gas. Grocery is also a big one. And they've kind of faltered with their acquisition of Whole Foods. But, Walmart's really the biggest player in grocery. And yet they continue to say that they're small when they have about 50+% online market share. I mean, come on. Stop trying to say that you're tiny and that you're the victim. You are not the victim here. The victim are the hundreds of thousands of US sellers who have been run through by practices and policies, calling guilty, turning off the cash flow systems for these Amazon sellers, and forcing them to prove that they're innocent after the fact. That's the practices that Amazon has been doing for decades. Not only do I see it day in and day out, but I've lived it. I've felt that pain personally, which is why I'm so adamant about speaking out and defending the rights and defending the fairness of small businesses. Small businesses are the backbone of this country. They account for roughly half of the jobs in America. And their voice with our legislators is nothing. It's virtually nothing. It's so tiny and small. And here we have a situation where Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat, and Senator Grassley, a Republican, are coming together to work in a bipartisan effort to open up competition and to allow small businesses the chances to thrive and survive and become the next Google, Amazon, Facebook, Tencent, TikTok, right? That environment, folks, does not exist in today's world. And the legislators are doing their best to get this done. Next, Kara Swisher goes on to say,
what is the sensible solution from your perspective to that? Brands that are worried about, there's so many brands that are worried about being on Amazon. They don't know what you're going to do because you could do anything because you have such power in the online space.
If you want a solution, let's hear it. Andy Jassy says, first of all, I disagree with your power comment. And the next thing, he goes into a diatribe about why sellers should love Amazon.
When you've got 2 million sellers and 500,000 in the US who are making a very different living because of their access to a few hundred million customers, I think, you can always find certain sellers who will tell you things that we need to do better. And by the way, there are a lot of things we need to do better. We have a long list ourselves, but the overwhelming majority of sellers and feedback we get is very positive. This bill, I don't know how much you've looked at this bill. I've looked very carefully at this bill. It is so broad and so vague and so overreaching that it's going to do a lot of unintended harm.
His threat or his comment there is to say, sellers, you really love all this business that we're giving you. You're welcome. And by the way, if you support this bill, you're going to have a lot of unintended harm. I just don't see it. I don't read it in the bill. I don't believe it. And there's nothing in the words that I have read that said that that's going to be the case. In fact, the opposite will be the case. And so again, what are your solutions? He says, well, there's room to talk about things. If you want to create and solve private label, we can address that in a different way. We'll look at that. But let's be honest, does anyone really think that Amazon would support a privacy bill that would limit their control of data? They have more privacy on US citizens now than Facebook. Do you really think that they would want to limit their power and control? They just announced Roomba acquisition, One Medical acquisition. Does anyone really think with Amazon's historical track record that they're not going to share data and be able to identify, even if it's anonymized, who the people that are providing that data are? I, for one, do not. The track record just doesn't prove it out. Here's the tactic. Andy Jassy is doing everything that he can in his power to defeat this one bill. He's lumping in there with $100 million roughly from all of these tech companies to defeat it. At all costs, no matter what. They're using scare tactics, kind of like they do with the unions in the warehouse situation. They're using scare tactics to sell consumers into thinking that they're going to lose their Prime account and sellers into thinking that their business that's so good for them right now is going to die if this bill gets passed. And then when he defeats this bill, he will go on and apply those exact same tactics, those exact same resources, if not more, to defeat a privacy bill, to defeat a private label bill. That's my take. And, I'll come back on this episode a year from now. And if anything has happened that refutes what I just said, I'll be happy to take anyone on in a live interview to discuss it. And I'll own it. But there's no way in hell, in my opinion, that happens. And then, more victim, more whining.
In our retail business, we have 1% of worldwide market segment share in retail.
No, you're not. You're 50% of online in the United States, right?
In our AWS business, 90 to 95% of the global IT spend is on premises.
Come on, everything is moving to the cloud. And Amazon AWS has about 40% of that online market share. He says, just because we've had success across multiple businesses doesn't mean we have market power or monopolies in each of those areas we operate. No one's saying you have monopolies in each of those areas, but you have it in 4 potentially, especially when you use that power for anti-competitive practices to limit your competition and to change the market as it exists, like self-preferencing or most favored nation clauses, buy box suppression, being the judge, juror, and executioner for so many small businesses struggling to keep their lights on. He says people don't have to choose Amazon. We have a small market share in each of those other areas. Oh, here we go again. You're so small, Andy. Actually, that comment came from Kara Swisher.
We still have relatively small market segment share in all those areas.
You're so small, Andy. It's so sad how small.
With half the online market share, sellers kind of do have to choose Amazon. I do this day in and day out as my agency. I search for product category phrases or product names on Google, on Bing, on Shopzilla. And guess whose listings dominate the first page of search results pages? Amazon. You cannot escape them, no matter where you go online. Whether that's an article talking about how great a product is, to the New York Times about product reviews, you name it. Anywhere else, no matter where you see a product, all roads lead to Amazon. One other issue. If you were being accused by the US government of having 40 to 60% market share selling tractors, would it be a fair defense for you to compare your market to a market selling toys, to a market selling gas? You're not comparing apples to apples. And that, my friends, that is what Amazon continues to do. They're trying to lump themselves in to make themselves look smaller, to make themselves look meek, but there's no way in hell that they're either of those things. Final couple of questions here for this segment of the interview at Code Conference. And again, I got to tip my hat off to Kara Swisher. She did a great job really redirecting and coming back with some real pointed comments and questions throughout the interview.
Do you see you spinning off any of your divisions at all?
We don't have a plan to do so.
I would have followed, if I were Kara Swisher, with even though your investors would become more fabulously wealthy by you spinning off AWS, why won't you consider spinning off AWS? She didn't do that, but it was okay. He kind of slammed the door shut on that. She continues to say, Jeff said that Prime, Marketplace, and AWS were the three pillars of Amazon's success. Take a victory lap, Amazon and Andy Jassy, because you deserve it. You owned it. You did it. You did Prime, you did Marketplace, you did AWS. You did it better than anybody else in the market, and you won.
Jeff said Prime, Marketplace, and AWS were the three pillars of Amazon. What do you imagine the fourth is?
There's a number of potential answers. It could end up being streaming entertainment. Mm-hmm. It could end up being Alexa. It could end up being transportation with what we're doing with Zoox. It could end up being the low Earth orbital satellite that we're building with Kuiper. And it could end up being healthcare.
It's tough for me to square this comment about how Amazon will spend billions required to gain market share in 5 enormous up-and-coming industries with we're really small. We're such a small part of the greater being. It just contradicts itself throughout this segment and throughout the information. Now, folks, why did I do this? I have a problem when I see things said by powerful companies who are saying one thing, doing another, and trying to convince you that they're not doing that bad thing. I got a real problem with it. I believe that the next billion-dollar company is being launched on Amazon right now, or Shopify, or in any of these other marketplaces, and their potential for growth is being limited because of monopoly power from 5, 6, 7 companies. And the US government, it is time to do their job and to come in here and step in and rein in that power. Power blinds and power corrupts. No matter what your intentions are when you started, this is a truth. It is a fact of the human nature that this is happening. So much of what he said lacked vision and was meant to obfuscate rather than educate. And that's my role here today. That's what I hope to accomplish. I hope that you've learned something about this bill. If these legislators can't rein in this power, who will? No one. This is the natural course of events. You won e-commerce, you won books, you won voice recognition, you won final mile delivery in AWS. Take a victory lap. Voluntarily break this company up and spread the amazing innovation that you created at Amazon beyond its walls, far and wide. It would be great for investors. It would be great for innovation. It would be great for competition. It would be great for consumers. It would be great for small businesses, but more importantly, it would be great for the country as a whole. Lastly, I would like to encourage each and every one of you, if you have even a sliver of the passion that I do about reining in the power of big tech and Amazon, reach out to your local congressman, reach out to your local senator, state leaders, let them know how this bill would positively affect you and tell them that you support it. Talk to them about it. Help them understand that the bill that they're about to write is going to affect you in a positive way. You can also go to bidenpromised.us It is a coalition that's collecting signatures to get in front of President Biden and Senator Schumer to tell them to do the right thing and get this bill up for a vote. It's got the bipartisan support. It will pass, and it will be better for you, the seller. Lastly, if any of you know anyone who would gain value from this podcast, please share it with them. Thank you for listening. Thank you for considering my take. And thanks for looking with a fine-tooth comb at everything that Amazon and the big tech companies are saying.